Hey guys! Today I want to talk with you about Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. This dark romance novel was published in 2021 and it's the first novel in Cat and Mouse duology. As per usual, we will start this video with a short synopsis, then proceed to the non-spoiler review and wrap this video up with the spoilers. If you haven't had a chance to read Haunting Adeline yet, then do not worry. I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. So the official synopsis for this novel is incredibly vague and touches upon two people. One called the Manipulator, who has the ability to control human emotions, and the Shadow, a person whose emotions the Manipulator is unable to control. A person who desperately falls in love with the Manipulator, the kind of love that borderlines an obsession. Now, when I read the synopsis for the first time, I was very sure that this novel has to be at least partially stepping into fantasy territory. I mean, we are speaking about a person who can manipulate human emotions, and that's pretty cool. So let me disappoint you and let you know that this novel has nothing to do with fantasy, and the whole manipulator and shadow thing is just a way for the author to sound mysterious when she describes a woman who writes books for a living and a stalker. The actual synopsis of the novel is that in Haunting Adeline, we get to follow a 20-something-year-old woman who inherits her grandmother's Gothic house, situated in a rather remote location. This woman, Adeline, has been extremely close with her grandmother, and since as an author she can work remotely, she doesn't hesitate for a second before relocating into this somewhat creepy house. And then into the picture comes our Shadow, a hacker millionaire who has fallen in love with Adeline from the first second he saw her and is not shy about the idea of stalking her, scaring her, and pushing her buttons until she falls in love with him too. While preparing for this video, I sat down to rewrite the official synopsis, and honestly, the moment I finished it, I got worried that I made this novel sound somewhat interesting. So believe me when I say that this was absolutely not an intention of mine. Haunting Adeline was bad. Absolutely awful read, and I hate that I wasted and obviously continue to waste my time on it. And I know maybe a little too often I tend to say that this is the worst book I have read in a long while, but this one might actually take the cake. I noticed Haunting Adeline being mentioned in a discussion about the really messed up dark romance novels, and naturally I got curious. I'm not new to the genre and I wanted to see just how far H.D. Carlton is willing to push. And don't get me wrong, the book is messed up, and the trigger warnings should definitely be taken into consideration, as all of these topics and actions are very prominent in the novel. But what was the biggest deal breaker, personally for me, is that Haunting Adeline is boring. It relies solely on shock value, and once that novelty is gone, there is nothing there left that would attract you to come back and continue reading it. Now, since I read a lot and I am an impulsive buyer who barely ever does any research on the books before getting them, especially if I'm only planning to have them on my Kindle, I end up reading a lot of boring stuff. And usually I can't be bothered to make videos on any of them precisely because of how dull they are. And I wasn't planning to make a video on Haunting Adeline either. My only goal concerning this book was to push my way through it, as I do have an issue with leaving any book unfinished. But by the time I reached the 80% mark, I was so pissed about everything related to this novel that all I wanted to do was to continuously hit my head into a wall. So while the healthier option would be to do what this lovely Goodreads user did and pretend that Haunting Adeline simply doesn't exist, instead I decided to vent my frustrations to you in hopes that it isn't just me who found the experience of reading this novel unbearable. For those of you who haven't read the book, let me quickly explain why Haunting Adeline wasn't a book for me, well, besides it being incredibly dull. First of all, the way it was written reminded me of some of the worst kind of amateur Wattpad stories. And I grew up with fanfiction. I wrote fanfiction. I just expect higher quality writing when I'm choosing to read a professionally edited and published novel. The world we are presented with doesn't feel real or fleshed out. The same thing can be said about the main characters. I have spent over 500 pages with them, and yet everything I know about either one of them could be easily summarized in one sentence each. I feel like the author tried to create a more complex family dynamic, at least when it comes to Adeline and her upbringing. Yet all of that just felt incredibly superficial, rushed, and non-consequential. And as for the main male lead, instead of being a dangerous yet fascinating man, he comes off as an unstable hypocrite. And I honestly believe that wasn't what H.D. Carlton was going for. Side characters don't have any personality either. Adeline's best friend is in this book a lot, yet all we know about her is that she's a hacker and that both she and Adeline should consider cutting down on their alcohol intake. To add to that, her only purpose for being in this book, besides once in a while conveniently solving a problem, is letting our main character vent. Most of the side characters are just there to be evil, just so our stalker guy could arguably look a little bit better by comparison. Besides the main storyline that we follow in the present time, we also get to read Adeline's great-grandmother's diary, which I was somewhat intrigued with right from the get-go, until I realized just how repetitive it is. Though honestly, that can be said about this whole novel. It is insanely repetitive. I'm willing to bet that at least 200 pages could be cut out from this book, and that wouldn't hurt the main story progression in the slightest. In addition to that, there is not a lot of logic behind our characters' actions and motivations, as well as there is barely any logic behind the way the bad guys operate. I don't want to get too much into detail here, as I don't want to spoil any of this excitement for you, but to explain it vaguely, in Haunting Adeline we learn about probably the most influential and dangerous and super secret invitation-only organization that it's impossible to infiltrate, and then we proceed to infiltrate it with less of an issue than one might expect to face while trying to get into a local bar while already being overly intoxicated. Overall, the way the author describes the Shadow's job makes me think that H.D. Carlton has watched way too many Mission Impossible or James Bond movies. Another thing that grinds my gears is that at times the plot of the novel teases us with aspects of magical realism, yet it never fully commits to, nor does it stick the landing. It kind of feels like the supernatural elements were introduced solely because the author couldn't find a way to quickly enough reach a solution to a problem our main lead was dealing with. And maybe because she thought that a gothic house simply has to have a supernatural presence in it. Now, all that being said, I want to make sure that everybody knows that I'm not here to shame anyone for their kinks. Dark romances have a popular place within the romance genre for a reason. It allows readers to explore intense emotions and experiences vicariously through the characters in the story. Additionally, dark romance often features complex, flawed characters and explores themes of power, control, and desire, which can be compelling to some readers. Even this idea of a non-consensual relationship could be very interesting to explore if done properly. Just before picking up Haunting Adeline, I had a chance to read Corrupt by Penelope Douglas, in which we follow a 19-year-old girl who gets turned on when she's scared. And I know I'm oversimplifying this, but I found it interesting how both Penelope Douglas and H.D. Carlton took this idea of a female lead who has the same reaction to fear and gave us two very different versions of romantic relationships. While in Corrupt, the main male lead was nothing short of an abusive asshole, for me personally, the leads still worked very well as a couple, because throughout the book they learn how to play with each other, how to push each other's buttons, and how to show genuine emotion when it was needed. While in Haunting Adeline, I couldn't feel any relationship progression besides that of the physical one. If anything, in this novel, instead of following our shadow and manipulator on a journey where they learn how to complement each other's lives, we just get a story in which the stalker slowly wears down his victim. So yeah, I think that sums up the main issues that I have with Haunting Adeline. And that's why we should move to the spoiler review, where we could talk a little bit more freely about our main characters and the plot of this novel. Alright, so now that it's only us here, as in people who sat through this novel and who first-handedly knows my pain, let's talk a little bit more about why Zaid and Addie and they together as a couple suck. So I guess I will not surprise anyone saying that Zaid is the biggest hypocrite possible. I mean, it's either that or the author didn't really know who she wanted Zaid to be. She presented him to us as an absolute psychopath, who takes what he wants without any regrets, who doesn't understand boundaries, and who is willing to do literally anything in order to reach his goal, aka be with Adeline. He stalks her, he breaks into her house repeatedly, he threatens her with violence if she will talk to the police, he hacks into the police records so there wouldn't be any traces of her seeking help, as well as he hacks into her security cameras and spies on her, and I guess last but definitely not least, he sexually assaults and eventually rapes her. At the same time, I guess the author wasn't sure that her readers can commit to this relationship or to Zaid as a main character because of all the things he's doing to Addie, and therefore she did her very best to backpedal and create separate storylines in which Zaid is nothing short of a hero who uses his abilities of hacking, stalking, and mercilessly killing for the good of the society. And to really push on this misunderstood hero plotline, H.D. Carlton even decided to use a pedophile cult, which traffics children as the biggest baddies of the story. Because who would hate a man that saves poor innocent children from the fate worse than death? Even if the ways he uses to save them are rather unconventional. The problem here is, though, that the stalker rapist Zaid and the misunderstood hero Zaid simply cannot be one and the same person. To put it as simply as possible, if a person sees an issue with someone buying children as if they are a property and using them to fulfill their twisted needs, that same person cannot himself treat a human being as a personal property and use them to fulfill his own twisted needs. Unless that person is a complete hypocrite, which, once again, Zaid absolutely is. Now let's look at some facts here. Zaid says in one of his chapters that he's absolutely repulsed by the fact that the children are being sold and bought by the highest bidder, while at the same time he refers to Addie as his most precious possession. And no, he doesn't mean it in a sweet, you the apple of my eye type of way. He points out how important consent is on even such a small thing as showing a photo of a 3-year-old girl, which he previously saved from being trafficked, to the strangers, despite knowing that showing the photo could help him to get further into the secret cult. But when it comes to Addie, it's like, consent what? Never heard of it. From the day one, from the moment he laid his eyes on Addie, he believed that he knew better what she wants than she does. Over and over again, Zaid preaches about not living by the morals that society trusts upon him, about how he created this life for himself, that he created his own set of moral norms he wished to follow, that he does what he wants to do and not what society tells him he has to. While at the same time, he hates with fury the pedophile ring that does believe the exact same ideology he does. This cult doesn't follow what is normally accepted. Instead, they take what they want when they want it. They live by the moral compass of their own creation. Now let me be loud and clear. I absolutely do not support the pedophilia cult that is described in this book in any way, shape, or form. I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy of seeing Zaid as the hero. The only differences between Zaid and the cult is that Addie is a proper grown-up and that Zaid has no intention of selling her to others. He prefers to keep her for himself. And while Addie is not nearly as controversial or anger-inducing character, she's not interesting to follow either. She's just a boring, very annoying, and incredibly stupid protagonist that surprisingly has no business being in this book. Literally, her only reason for being in the story is to be the person who receives this twisted affection Zaid gives her. Besides Zaid, there's absolutely nothing for Addie to do in the novel. I mean, sure, you could say that she was there to figure out who killed her great-grandma, but as far as I'm concerned, the diary entries had no actual importance on the storyline, and even the murder itself was solved by Addie's best friend and the ghosts living in the house, and not Addie herself. Addie is in this novel just because Zaid needs someone to terrorize. And honestly, once the initial shock of being stalked and assaulted passed, Addie seemed to be cool with the situation in such a way that no one with half a brain would be. And the bar she set for Zaid is so low. She becomes infatuated with Zaid because he would share his favorite food with her. That's the bar. It's on the floor. Their relationship is incredibly weird, reminiscent of a Stockholm Syndrome case more than anything else. Not in one part of the novel I could see their connection, nor could I sympathize with main characters, and I do enjoy a good bully or dark romance once in a while, but this just wasn't it. She fell in love with Zaid because of one fuck session. He told her to fall in love with him before the said session was over, and so she did, because that's how emotional attachment works, obviously. Now, if we take a moment to talk about the barely existing plot of the book, I have to point out once again that the secret society / pedophile cult is simply ridiculous. And probably the most ridiculous thing about it is just how easily Zaid got accepted into it. All he had to do is show up in a club and show a photo of a little girl and tell one random dude that he really likes them young, and the next thing you know, Zaid is invited to their secret dinners and sacrificing ceremonies. And sure, that ceremony was a trap made specifically for Zaid, but still. There's no way in the world that this impenetrable, super secret organization that is also a place for really rich and important people to get what they crave is this easily hackable or that easily accepts new members. I mean, in my humble opinion, joining a human trafficking cult should be more complicated than joining an after-school activity. Besides that, the other plotline, the diary entries of Addie's great-grandma, started rather interesting and ended up being not relevant as well. I mean, it was more than obvious that the stalker did not kill that woman, and if anything, that blast from the past was used to make Zaid look better in the eyes of Addie, as in her great-grandma wasn't killed by her stalker, so that's why Addie and Zaid are meant to be. When it comes to the ending of the novel, I have to say that usually I'm quite susceptible to cliffhangers. Even if I'm not a massive fan of a book, I will continue reading the sequel just to get to know what happened. But this time, I have no wish, not a tiny bit of curiosity in me to know who put this trap for Zaid, what will happen with Addie or her bestie, how their love story will progress, and so on. I forced myself through the last chapters of the book, and I absolutely do not care what the second one entails. Honestly, I don't even know what else could be said about Haunting Adeline. It's boring, it's a waste of time, and I feel like the only reason it got this inexplicable hype is because the trigger warnings make it seem more interesting than it actually is. It tricks you into believing that you're about to read something truly taboo, which you're not. It's just stupid with a dash of dark romance. I absolutely regret wasting my time on it, and while I do believe that every book finds its reader, I just can't in good conscience force myself to recommend this novel to anyone, ever. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?